The final click of the deadbolt sliding home was a sigh of relief, a sound that settled deep in Mira's bones. It was the sound of safety. The little bell above the door to the Rolling Pin Bakery gave a final, cheerful jingle as she turned the sign to closed, its cursive letters a friendly goodbye to the quiet street outside. Her world smelled of yeast and cooling sugar, a warm, sweet perfume that clung to her clothes and hair, and she loved it. In fact, it was the only world she wanted. It was simple. It was predictable. She kneaded dough. She frosted cupcakes. She knew Mrs. Gable would come in at precisely 10 a.m. for a rye loaf, and young Timmy would press his face against the glass after school, hoping for a broken cookie. This was her fortress, a small flour-dusted kingdom she had built for herself. Because of that, every quiet moment felt like a victory. She moved through the familiar space, wiping down the stainless steel counters, her reflection a pale, soft-edged version of herself. Just Mira. No last name that mattered, no family to speak of, just a girl who was good with her hands and better at being invisible. Deep down, she knew the truth. This quiet was borrowed time. A feeling, slick and unsettling like oil on water, sometimes surfaced in her heart. A feeling that she was waiting for something, or that something was waiting for her. She always pushed it down. That night, the feeling was stronger. The hum of the refrigerators was the only sound as she swept the last of the day's crumbs into a dustpan. A floor cleaned, a counter wiped, a day ended. These were her rituals. They kept the world from feeling too big, too loud, too much. But then, a sound from the back alley made her freeze. It wasn't a cat. It was heavier. A scrape of a boot on gravel, followed by a low, guttural laugh that had nothing to do with happiness. Her heart didn't just beat. It kicked against her ribs like a trapped bird. Don't be silly, Mira. It's just people from the bar next door. Still, her hands felt slick with a sudden sweat. She clutched the handle of the broom, the wood feeling flimsy and useless in her grip. Another laugh, closer this time, and the unmistakable clink of a glass bottle shattering against the brick wall. Every instinct screamed at her to stay inside, to call the police, to hide in the walk-in cooler until morning. Yet she had to take the trash out. It was the last ritual of the night. Breaking the routine felt like tempting fate, like admitting she was scared. And she was. She didn't know what scared her more, the men in the alley or the paralyzing fear that locked her muscles in place. Taking a deep, shaky breath that tasted of sugar and fear, she pulled the heavy trash bag from its can. Just be quick. In and out. They won't even see you. She unlocked the heavy metal back door, the screech of its hinges sounding like a scream in the sudden silence. The alley was a canyon of shadows, smelling of damp garbage and stale beer. Two men leaned against the opposite wall, their forms bulky and menacing in the dim glow of the single security light. One of them turned, his eyes catching the light, and a slow, ugly smile spread across his face. Well, look what we have here, he slurred, pushing himself off the wall. Little Baker's working late. Her blood went cold. This wasn't a random encounter. They had been waiting. Before she could move, his friend was blocking the door behind her, cutting off her only escape. The world narrowed to the grimy brick walls and the leering faces of the two men closing in on her. Her breath hitched. The broom handle was a toothpick. Her life, her quiet, fragile life, felt like it was about to be torn apart like a day-old pastry. And she screamed. A thin, useless sound swallowed by the night.
From the rooftop across the street, Arik watched the light in the bakery click off. And he waited. He was a king in exile, perched on the grimy ledge of a forgotten building, his kingdom a single, oblivious woman who smelled of cinnamon and vanilla. The scent drifted on the night air, a sweet torture that called to every primal instinct in his body. The bond, the ancient, unbreakable tether between him and his fated mate, was a constant, burning ache behind his ribs. A fire he had to keep banked, lest it consume them both. He saw her turn the sign, saw the soft glow of her hair under the dim interior lights. Mira. Even her name was a whisper of peace, a peace he was sworn to protect, and cursed to never share. Because of that, he kept to the shadows. He was her guardian ghost, her silent protector, a monster who kept other monsters at bay. Tonight, the monsters had come. He'd scented them an hour ago. Rorik's mutts. They reeked of cheap whiskey and the bitter tang of another pack's territory. They were sloppy, but they were a message, a test, a cruel, deliberate move to see if he would break his silence, to see if the Alpha King of the Silvermoon Pack would reveal his obsession with a simple human baker. Human. The thought was a bitter laugh in his mind. She was no more human than he was. She was the lost heir, the secret daughter of his most hated rival, a wolf who didn't know she had claws. And if Rorik ever discovered who she was, who he had lost all those years ago, he would use her as a weapon that would bring both their kingdoms to ruin. So, Arik watched. He endured the agony of seeing her, smelling her, wanting her, and doing nothing. But then, he heard the back door screech open. A growl, low and guttural, vibrated in his chest. No, he had miscalculated. He thought they would try the front, or wait until she was on her way home. The alley was a trap, a kill box. Without thinking, he was moving. Not a man running, but a shadow flowing over the edge of the rooftop. He dropped into the alley behind the bakery, landing without a sound, his body coiled with a violence he kept leashed with chains of iron will. He heard her small, terrified scream, and those chains shattered. The world went red at the edges. He saw the two brutes cornering her, saw the slick, predatory hunger in their eyes. He saw his mate, pressed against the wall, her face a mask of pure terror. And in that moment, he wasn't a king. He wasn't a politician or a strategist. He was a possessor, a male, an alpha whose most precious treasure was about to be defiled. In the span of a breath, he crossed the alley. The first man never saw him coming. Arik's hand clamped around his throat, lifting him from the ground, crushing his windpipe with a single brutal squeeze. There was a sickening crunch of bone, and the man went limp. Arik dropped the body like a sack of trash. The second man spun around, his drunken surprise turning to shock, then to a flicker of species recognition. He saw the predator behind the man's face. He saw the eyes, not human brown or blue, but the color of molten gold, blazing with a fury that was older than cities. He opened his mouth to shout a warning, to call on his wolf. He never got the chance. Arik was on him, a blur of motion, a force of pure, destructive rage. It was over in seconds, not a fight, an execution.
One moment, death was smiling at her, its breath reeking of stale beer. The next, chaos. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the alley. It moved with a speed that didn't make sense, a silent, violent storm that erupted between her and her attackers. Her breath caught. There was a terrible, wet crunch. One of the men simply dropped. He didn't fall. He collapsed, a puppet with its strings cut. Her mind couldn't process it. The second man turned, and the shadow, the man, was on him. It wasn't a fistfight. It was a predator taking down prey. Fast, brutal, and terrifyingly efficient. Her protector moved with a grace that was inhuman, a fluid lethality that belonged to the deep, wild places of the world. As the silence stretched, the second man lay crumpled on the ground, groaning. The stranger stood over him, his chest rising and falling in deep, controlled breaths. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes that seemed to drink the light. He hadn't made a sound. Slowly he turned, and his eyes found hers. The moment their eyes locked, the world tilted on its axis. They weren't brown. They weren't blue. They were gold, a shade of impossible liquid gold like a wild animal's glowing with a fierce ancient light. They weren't just looking at her. They were seeing into her, peeling back layers she didn't even know she had. In those eyes, she saw a fury so profound it scared her, but beneath it, something else. A possessive, agonizing pain that resonated with the lonely ache in her own soul. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, desperate beat. Who? She took a half step forward, a word of thanks, a question, anything, forming on her lips. Without another word, he turned. He didn't run. He simply walked away. He melted back into the shadows from which he'd come and vanished. as if he was never there at all. Mira stood frozen, trembling in the sudden, absolute silence of the alley. The only evidence of the last minute of her life was the two broken men on the pavement, and the lingering image of those impossible golden eyes burned into her mind. He had saved her life. He had looked at her as if she was the only thing in his world, and then he had left her, as if she was nothing at all. The sting of that rejection, sharp and bewildering, cut deeper than any fear. And a single burning question echoed in the ruins of her quiet little world. Why? A week passed, then two. The quiet in the bakery was no longer a comfort. It was a liar. Every shadow seemed to stretch, to twist into the shape of a man. Every sound from the alley was a prelude to violence. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford, and her reflection in the glass display case showed a stranger with dark, haunted circles under her eyes. She was a ghost in her own life, and the only thing that felt real was the memory of those impossible, blazing golden eyes. To make things worse, her savior had created a new kind of prison. She couldn't walk home without her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. She couldn't close the shop without that cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. He saved her, yes, but he had left her with a fear that was now her constant companion. The second time it happened, she was walking home. The street was well lit, cars passed occasionally, but the feeling of being watched prickled at the back of her neck like a spider's legs. Without warning, a man stepped out from between two parked cars, blocking her path. Another appeared behind her. They weren't the same men, but they had the same dead eyes, the same hungry smirk. Her first thought wasn't fear. It was a hot, surging anger. Again? She didn't scream this time. She clutched her keys in her fist, the metal biting into her palm, and she ran. She ran into the street, a car swerving and honking, its headlights momentarily blinding her. In that moment, the shadow was there. He moved like smoke and struck like lightning. It was over before the car had even finished braking. One man was on the ground, the other was staggering away, clutching a broken arm, and he was gone. She stood panting in the middle of the road, the driver yelling at her, but she didn't hear him. She only saw the empty space where her protector had stood. This time a furious frustration boiled up inside her, hot and choking. It wasn't enough to save her. Not anymore. What followed was the third attack, 4 nights later. It was the sloppiest one yet, right outside the bar next door. A single burly man grabbed her as she was locking up, his hand clamping over her mouth. She fought. She bit his hand, tasting blood and dirt, and stomped on his foot. He grunted, his grip tightening, and she felt a real, sharp terror. Then, he was simply gone, ripped away from her. The shadow moved with a soundless fury, and the fight was over in 3 brutal, efficient movements. But then she saw it. A dark gash on her savior's forearm, a line of black blood visible for a split second before his sleeve fell to cover it. He was hurt. He was real. He could bleed. He turned to leave, and she finally found her voice. "Wait!" He didn't even slow down. He just disappeared into the night. She sank to her knees on the dirty sidewalk, the fight draining out of her, leaving her hollow. The anger, the fear, the confusion, it all collapsed into a single aching wound. It wasn't just about the attacks anymore, it was about him. This cruel, silent dance he forced her into. Deep down, she knew the truth. He was never going to stay. He was never going to explain. As she pushed herself up, her hand brushed against something small and soft on the ground where he had stood. Her fingers closed around it. She brought it into the light of the street lamp. It was a feather, pitch black, with a strange, almost metallic sheen, unlike any bird she had ever seen. It felt strangely warm in her hand. It was the only piece of him she had, a clue to a puzzle that was destroying her life. And it wasn't enough.
Meanwhile, miles away in a world of stone and shadow, the air in the great hall was thick with tension. The fire in the massive hearth threw dancing shadows against ancient tapestries depicting legendary hunts and brutal wars. It was a room that reeked of power and history, and right now, it felt like a cage. Arik stood before his council, 3 ancient wolves whose faces were maps of 100 battles. His beta, Kyle, stood to his right, his expression a careful mask of neutrality. You have been seen again in the human territories, Alpha, Elder Maeve said, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. Your scent. It is heavy with the girl. The pack is restless. They whisper that their king has found a pet. Arik's hands clenched into fists at his side. His control, the iron discipline that defined him, was the only thing stopping him from ripping the old wolf's throat out. My movements are my own, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. They are the pack's. Another elder, Ronan, slammed his hand on the stone table. Rorik tests our borders every night because he senses your distraction. He sends his filth to bloody your territory, and you spend your nights watching a human. He offers a truce and alliance through his daughter Lyra, and you spit on it. Why? For a baker who knows nothing of our world? The name Lyra tasted like ash in his mouth. Marry Rorik's pampered, vicious daughter? Bind his pack to that snake's for a hollow promise of peace? Never. That baker is the reason Rorik's thugs haven't pushed further into our city, Arik growled, his golden eyes flashing. Truth be told, every thug he put down was a message back to his rival. This far, and no further. A message he is clearly ignoring, Ronan shot back. She is a weakness, Arik, Maeve said, her tone softening slightly. Arik, we all feel the pull of a true mate. But if the fates have cursed you with one who is human, you cannot let it endanger us all. The alliance with Lyra would secure our borders. It is your duty. If you only knew, Arik thought, the irony a bitter pill. If you knew she carries the very blood of our enemy. But he couldn't tell them. He couldn't. Which meant he was alone in this, trapped between the pack he was born to lead and the woman he was born to love. The gash on his arm, a souvenir from the last cur he'd dispatched, throbbed with a dull pain. A reminder of how close he'd cut it. A reminder of her scent, a mix of sugar and terror that was driving him mad. Enough. Arik's voice cut through the air like a blade. The authority in it was absolute, silencing the elders instantly. Rorik will be dealt with. The alliance is not an option. This council is over. He turned and strode from the hall, leaving the scent of his fury in his wake. Kyle fell into step beside him as they walked down a torch-lit corridor. They are not wrong to be concerned, my friend, Kyle said quietly, his loyalty warring with his duty. They are fools who see only the easy path, Arik countered, his voice tight. And what do you see? Arik stopped, turning to face his oldest friend. I see the woman I love being hunted like an animal, and I see the pack that I am sworn to protect on the brink of a war we cannot afford to fight. I see a choice that will cost me either my soul or my kingdom. Kale's eyes were full of a sorrowful understanding. Before he could speak, the bond in Arik's chest twisted. A spike of pure, undiluted terror. Her terror lanced through him. It was sharper, more final than before. He had felt her fear, her anger. This was different. This was the silent scream of prey that knows the trap has finally sprung.
She had had enough. That night, Mira locked the front door with a sense of finality. She held the black feather in her pocket, its strange warmth a small comfort. She was done being a victim. Done being the damsel in this twisted, silent fairy tale. As if fate demanded it, the alley was where it happened again. The fourth time. He was there, a blur of righteous fury, and it was over in a heartbeat. But this time, when he turned to leave, she was ready. "Stop!" she screamed, her voice raw, echoing off the brick walls. He paused. Just for a second. His back was to her, a rigid wall of muscle and shadow. That single moment of hesitation was all the fuel she needed. "No, you don't get to do this again," she yelled, tears of pure, hot frustration streaming down her face. "You don't get to save me and then walk away like I'm garbage you just took out. Who are you?" He remained silent, unmoving. "Answer me," she sobbed, taking a step toward him. "If you're just going to leave me in the dark, if you won't even tell me your name, then just let them kill me next time. Don't help me. Stop saving me if you're not going to stay." The silence that followed roared in her ears. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, the tension between them a physical thing, a wire pulled taut enough to break. She could feel the war inside him. Maybe it was fate, but she felt it as surely as she felt her own pounding heart. And then, he was gone. He didn't walk. He just vanished into the shadows. The emptiness he left behind was a physical blow. She stood there, panting, her desperate plea hanging in the dead air. She had pushed and he had disappeared. She had lost. Instead of the relief of survival, a cold dread began to creep up her spine. The alley felt different now, colder, watchful. A low rumble broke the silence. Not thunder. It was the sound of an engine. A black van, its windows tinted so dark they looked like holes in the world, screeched into the alley, its headlights pinning her against the wall like a terrified moth. Before she could even process it, the side door slid open with a sickening thump. 2 men jumped out. They weren't like the others. They wore black, moved with a clean, professional purpose, and their eyes were cold and focused. They weren't here to hurt her. They were here to take her. Her scream died in her throat as they lunged. Her silent savior, the one she had just screamed at, the one she had just driven away. He wasn't coming, not this time. She had asked him to leave her alone, and he had.
The moment the bond twisted, the world went silent. The torchlight in the corridor seemed to dim, the concerns of his elders turning to meaningless dust in the wind. Cale was saying something, his mouth moving, but the only sound Arik could hear was the frantic, silent scream of his mate being stolen from him. It was a physical violation, a ripping sensation deep in his soul that was so profound, so absolute. It stole the air from his lungs. Rage was too small a word for what came next. It was a nova of cold, white fury that burned away the king, the strategist, the patient guardian. What was left was only the alpha, only the male. A growl that was more earthquake than sound ripped from his chest, shaking the very stones of the stronghold. He turned, his eyes blazing with a golden light that made Cale, a warrior who had faced down titans, take an involuntary step back. They have her. Arik's voice was a low, terrifyingly calm whisper that was more frightening than any shout. He didn't wait for a response. He strode back into the great hall, his every step a thunderclap of purpose. The elders, who had been muttering amongst themselves, fell silent. The air grew heavy, cold and electric with his fury. He slammed his hands down on the ancient stone table, and it didn't just shudder. It cracked, a spiderweb of fissures spreading from beneath his palms. "Rorik's men have taken the girl," he announced, his voice echoing in the sudden tomb-like silence. "I want every warrior we have in the human city. Now, I want every one of Rorik's dogs found." He lifted his head, and the raw, predatory light in his eyes promised death. "And Cale." "Alpha," Cale said, his voice steady despite the storm in front of him. "Bring me their heads." Without another word, he was gone. He didn't use the doors. He launched himself from the Great Hall's balcony, a dark shape against the moon dropping 100 feet to the courtyard below. He hit the ground running, a predator unleashed, his target's terror a frantic beacon in the landscape of his soul. His duty was no longer to his kingdom. It was to the frantic, stolen beat of his own heart.
Darkness and pain. A throbbing, rhythmic agony pulsed behind Mira's eyes. The world smelled of dust, oil, and the scratchy, suffocating scent of burlap. She was moving, jostled and bumped with the lurching of the van. A rough bag was over her head, and her hands were bound tightly behind her back, the zip tie biting into her wrists. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up her throat, but she swallowed it down. Screaming had gotten her nowhere. "Is she awake?" a gruff voice asked, too close. "Don't know, don't care," a second voice answered. "Just need to get her to the boss." He was real clear, unmarked. The boss? The words cut through her fear. This wasn't random. This was organized. Someone wanted her. But why? She was a baker, a nobody. The truth was, she wasn't a nobody, not to the man with the golden eyes, and these men were the consequence of that connection. The van lurched to a stop. She was hauled out, her feet stumbling on cold concrete. The air here was stale, heavy with the smell of decay and damp earth. A heavy metal door groaned shut, the sound echoing with a terrible finality. They ripped the bag from her head. She was in a vast, empty warehouse. Water dripped from the high, dark ceiling, and the only light came from a few bare bulbs that cast long, distorted shadows. Her two captors stood over her, their faces impassive. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling but clear. The first man just laughed. "Doesn't matter what we want, it's what he wants that counts." He took a step toward her, and something inside Mira snapped. The fear was still there, a cold, hard stone in her stomach, but a hot, defiant fury rose to meet it. She would not be a passive victim. She would not be a pawn in some game she didn't understand. Her body moved on instinct. While the first man was reaching for her, she kicked out, her heel connecting solidly with his knee. He roared in pain, staggering back. Without thinking, she spun, slamming her shoulder into the second man, knocking him off balance just for a second. And she ran. She ran into the vast, dark space, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. But something was wrong. Her legs were pumping faster than her thoughts. The concrete floor felt like it was flying by beneath her bare feet. The rows of steel shelving were a blur of rust and shadow. She wasn't just running. She was flying. A surge of power, alien and exhilarating, flooded her veins. For a dizzying second, the fear was replaced by a wild, shocking sense of freedom. She could hear the men shouting behind her, their footsteps heavy and clumsy compared to her impossible speed. Hope, bright and fierce, bloomed in her chest. "I can get away. I can actually get away." As if pulled by a string, her focus was so intent on the distant, grimy exit door that she didn't see the low-hanging iron support beam. Her world tilted. The impact was a sickening metallic crack. A starburst of white-hot pain exploded in her head. The floor rushed up to meet her, and the last thing she saw before the darkness swallowed her whole was a pool of her own blood spreading across the cold, dirty concrete.
The warehouse doors didn't open. They exploded inward, ripped from their hinges by a force that was not of this world. Arik stood in the opening, a silhouette of pure, unadulterated vengeance against the pale moonlight. His eyes were not golden. They were twin pits of fire, and they were locked on the sight of Mira, his Mira, lying in a broken heap on the floor, her hair matted with blood. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. The human facade he wore vanished. His features sharpened, his teeth elongated into fangs, and black vicious claws ripped through the tips of his fingers. He let out a roar that was not a sound of this earth. It was a promise of death, a declaration of war, the sound of a king's heart breaking. The two men who had been cautiously approaching Mira's unconscious form froze, their faces draining of all color. They saw him. They saw what he was, and they knew they were already dead. He was on them before they could draw a breath. The air thickened with the coppery scent of blood. To Mira, drifting in and out of consciousness, it was a nightmare ballet of shadows and screams. She saw her dark savior, but he was no longer just a man. He was a monster, a beautiful, terrifying beast of righteous fury, moving with a speed that made her own brief flight look like a child's crawl. She heard the wet, tearing sounds, the choked-off screams, and then silence. A profound, echoing silence. Moments later, he was kneeling at her side. The beast was gone, his features smoothing back into the face of the man, but the fire in his eyes was replaced by an agony so deep it stole her breath. He gently brushed the hair from her face, his touch surprisingly soft for a hand that had just been a clawed weapon. His fingers ghosted over the gash on her forehead. A low, pained sound, half whimper, half growl, escaped his lips. The sound of a man looking upon the wreckage of his entire world. He slid his arms beneath her, one under her knees, the other supporting her back, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. Her head lolled against his chest, and even through the fog of pain she was aware of the solid, radiating heat of him, the hard muscle of his chest, the scent of night air, pine, and his own unique wild musk. It was terrifying, and it was the safest she had ever felt in her entire life. He carried her out of that warehouse of death, leaving the carnage behind without a backward glance. He didn't take her to a hospital. He didn't take her back to her small, broken life. He strode into the deep woods that bordered the city, a king carrying his wounded queen, and disappeared into a darkness that had always been his home. And hers. She just didn't know it yet.
Mira woke up slowly, drifting on a soft, warm sea. The first thing she registered was the scent, not the stale, metallic odor of the warehouse, but the clean, sharp smell of pine, wood smoke, and something else. A faint, herbal fragrance like lavender and mint. The second thing was the comfort. She was lying on something impossibly soft, covered by a blanket that felt like spun silk against her skin. Her eyes fluttered open. She wasn't in a hospital. She was in a room made of dark, polished wood, the walls lined with shelves of books whose leather spines seemed to drink the light. A fire crackled merrily in a stone fireplace across the room, casting a warm, dancing glow over everything. She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness and a sharp, throbbing pain in her head pushed her back down against a mountain of pillows. She lifted a hand to her forehead, and her fingers brushed against a soft bandage. Beneath it, she could feel the gentle coolness of a salve. "Don't." The voice was a low rumble from the shadows near the fire. Her heart skipped. He stepped into the light. Her savior. Her monster. He was just a man now, dressed in a simple dark shirt and pants, but the coiled power in his posture was unmistakable. His impossible golden eyes watched her, and they weren't filled with rage anymore. They were filled with a raw, agonizing guilt. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "Somewhere safe," he answered, his voice carefully neutral. He walked over to the bedside table, placing a glass of water there. He didn't look at her. As the silence stretched, the memories came crashing back, the van, the warehouse, her own impossible speed, the iron beam, the blood, and him. The claws, the fangs, the terrifying, beautiful beast that had torn her enemies apart. A shiver of pure primal fear traced its way down her spine. "What are you?" she asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. He finally met her gaze, and the pain in his eyes was so profound it made her chest ache. "I'm the one who should have been there sooner." "That's not an answer," she shot back, pushing herself up on her elbows despite the spinning room. The fury from the alley, from weeks of confusion and terror, came bubbling back to the surface. "You can't just do that and then bring me here and say nothing. What was that? What are you? And what is happening to me? I ran. I've never run like that in my life." He looked away, his jaw tight. "It's complicated, Mira." "Complicated?" Her voice cracked. "Men keep trying to kill me. You appear out of thin air like some kind of demon, and I can suddenly run like a superhero. Complicated doesn't even begin to cover it. I deserve to know what's going on." "Knowing will only put you in more danger," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I think I'm already in danger," she cried, gesturing wildly. "I was kidnapped. You ripped those men apart. I saw you." With every heartbeat, the space between them crackled with tension. He was a wall, an immovable object of secrets and silent pain. And she was going to break herself against him if she had to. She needed answers more than she needed air. "Why?" she asked, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Why me? Why do you keep saving me, just to hide and say nothing? What do you want from me?" He took a step closer to the bed, his shadow falling over her. His scent, that wild pine and night air smell, filled her senses, making her head swim for an entirely different reason. He looked down at her, his golden eyes a swirling mix of duty, guilt, and a deep, possessive hunger that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "What I want," he began, his voice a low growl, "is to keep you safe." "By keeping me a prisoner?" she challenged. She threw the blanket off and swung her legs over the side of the bed, determined to stand, to leave, to do something. "By keeping you alive," he thundered, his control finally snapping. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. He was in front of her, his hands gripping her upper arms to steady her as she swayed. "You cannot leave this place, do you understand me? You are not safe out there." The moment their skin touched, it was like a lightning strike. A jolt of pure, white-hot energy shot up her arms and straight to her core, making her gasp. It wasn't a shock. It was a connection. A sudden, overwhelming feeling of recognition, of rightness, of coming home to a place she'd never been. Her bones remembered him. She saw a flash of surprise in his eyes, felt the tremor that went through his powerful frame. He felt it too. The space between them burned. His gaze dropped to her lips, and the air grew thick, heavy with unspoken things. Her pulse raced. She could feel the hard muscle beneath his shirt, the raw power thrumming through him. He was a predator, a monster, a king. And in that moment, she wasn't afraid of him at all. She was afraid of what she felt for him.
He had to let her go. He had to. But his hands wouldn't obey. The jolt of the mate bond, raw and unfiltered for the first time, was a drug. It sang through his veins. A siren song of completion, of destiny, of mine. He could feel her pulse fluttering beneath his fingertips, could smell the scent of her confusion and her burgeoning desire. It was everything he had ever wanted, and everything he couldn't have. He let her go as if she had burned him, stumbling back a step. The loss of contact was a physical pain. He turned away, running a hand through his hair, his control hanging by a single frayed thread. He spent the next 2 days in that gilded cage with her, the tension a constant, living thing between them. He watched her sleep, a silent, tormented guardian. He cooked for her, leaving trays of food by her door, because being in the same room with her was a sweet, unbearable torture. He answered her questions with half-truths and evasions, each one another brick in the wall he was forced to build between them. On the third night, while he was watching the moon rise from the cabin's porch, he heard the snap of a twig from the woods. It was Cale, and he was running. Arik was on his feet instantly, his body thrumming with alarm. Cale never ran unless the world was ending. His beta burst into the clearing, his face grim, his chest heaving. "Alpha," he panted, bowing his head. "A message from the border." "What is it?" Arik demanded, his voice low. "It's Rorik," Cale said, his eyes dark with grim news. "He used your absence, Alpha. He's calling you a deserter, a king who abandoned his post for a human whore. He's spun it as an act of aggression, an insult to the alliance he offered. Because of that, he's declared a blood feud. His war packs hit 2 of our border settlements an hour ago. They're burning our homes, Arik. They're killing our people." Every word was a hammer blow. This was it, the nightmare he had been trying to prevent, the choice he had been dreading. His actions, his obsession, his love for the woman sleeping peacefully inside that cabin, had brought war to his kingdom. The weight of 1,000 lives, of generations of his people settled on his shoulders, a crushing, unbearable burden. He looked back at the warm, firelit window of the cabin. He could see Mira's silhouette as she moved inside, his heart, his soul. Then he looked at Cale, at the grim reality of his duty, his kingdom, his people. "Go back," Arik said, his voice dead, hollowed out. "Tell the War Masters to fortify the stronghold. I will be there by morning." Cale nodded once, a deep, sorrowful understanding in his eyes, and then he was gone, a ghost melting back into the trees. Arik stood there under the cold, indifferent light of the moon, and he felt his heart break in 2. To make things worse, he knew what he had to do. He had to choose. And a king's only real choice is his people. He had to leave her. Again. But this time it felt like leaving his own soul behind in the dirt. He went inside. He found a piece of parchment and a charcoal stick. "I'm sorry," he wrote, the words a pathetic, useless apology for the pain he was about to cause. He looked at the map of the territories that hung on the wall, a desperate, foolish hope sparking in his chest. He took it down, folded it carefully. A trail of breadcrumbs, a prayer that one day she might understand, that one day she might follow.
Mira woke to a silence that was deeper than sleep. The fire in the hearth had died, leaving a pile of pale gray ash that looked like powdered bone. The warmth of the room was gone, replaced by a deep, penetrating chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Hello?" she called out, her voice small in the vast quiet. No answer. A cold dread, familiar and sickening, washed over her. She threw the blanket off and stood up, her body still sore but her mind sharp with a gathering panic. She moved through the small cabin. The main room was empty. The small kitchen was empty. He was gone. Her thoughts spun. No. Not again. Not after that moment between them. Not after that touch. He wouldn't. He couldn't. She stumbled back into the bedroom, her eyes scanning every corner as if he might be hiding in the shadows. And then she saw it. Lying on the pillow where he had slept, folded into a neat square, was a map. On top of it was a small torn piece of parchment. Her hand trembled as she picked it up. 2 words. I'm sorry. The note fluttered from her fingers. The air rushed out of her lungs in a choked, wounded sound. Her chest ached. It wasn't just abandonment this time, it was a verdict. It was the final confirmation of the ugly, twisted belief she'd carried her whole life. She was not worth staying for. She was something to be saved and then discarded. An inconvenience, a secret, a mistake. Tears, hot and furious, blurred her vision. She looked at the map, at its strange lines and ancient-looking symbols. A map to his world. A world he had saved her from, only to throw her back into her own, alone and broken. In the quiet that followed, a new feeling began to smolder beneath the heartbreak. It was a hard, cold anger, a defiant rage. She would not be his victim. She would not be his sad little secret. She crumpled the useless apology in her fist. She turned her back on the map, and she walked out of that beautiful, gilded cage, not looking back, determined to find her own way. She was done with him. She was done with mysteries. She was going back to the only thing that had ever been real, her small, quiet life. Even if she had to fight the whole world to get it back. The journey back to her bakery was a long walk through a city that no longer felt like home. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every passing car a potential kidnapper. By the time she stood before the familiar green door of the rolling pin, the sun was a pale, watery smudge in the morning sky. The key felt strange in her hand, like it belonged to someone else's life. Inside, the air was stale. The sweet scent of yesterday's baking had been replaced by the cold, dead smell of abandonment. It wasn't a fortress anymore. It was a dollhouse, small and fragile and fake. She ran a hand over a flour-dusted counter, trying to feel the old comfort, the old peace. But it was gone. All she felt was the ghost of a girl who had been happy with so little, because she knew nothing of the vast, dangerous world that lurked just outside her door. I just need to get back to normal, she told herself, the thought a desperate prayer. I'll bake, I'll open the shop, I'll forget him. But she couldn't forget. She couldn't forget the feel of his hands on her arms, the fire in his golden eyes, or the impossible speed that still hummed in her own veins. She spent the day trying to force it, trying to knead her life back into a familiar shape. But the dough felt lifeless in her hands, and her heart wasn't in it. She kept glancing at the alley door, her body tensed, waiting. That night, they came again. She was taking out the trash, her body moving on a painful automatic loop when she scented them. It wasn't a thought. It was a primal knowing. The air shifted, carrying the sour, aggressive smell of unwashed bodies and bad intentions. 2 of them, one in front, one behind. Her first feeling wasn't fear. It was a profound, bone-deep weariness. Not again. Nowhere to run this time, little baker, one of them sneered, stepping out from behind the dumpster. But he was wrong. In that moment, something inside her shifted. It was the memory of the warehouse, the feeling of her legs moving faster than thought. It had been an accident then, a reflex. This time it would be a choice. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She dropped the trash bag, and she ran. She didn't just run away from them. She ran at the one blocking her escape route. He laughed, reaching for her, expecting a clumsy, terrified girl. Instead, she pushed. Not with her muscles, but with that strange, humming power coiled inside her. The world seemed to slow down, the man's surprised face a perfect picture of arrogance turning to shock. She dodged under his outstretched arm, her movements fluid and impossibly fast. She was past him before he could even blink. "What the?" she heard him shout, his voice filled with disbelief. She didn't look back. She flew down the alley, her feet barely seeming to touch the grimy pavement. The power surged through her, a wild, exhilarating song of freedom and strength. It felt incredible. It felt right. This was who she was now. She couldn't hide from it. She couldn't bake it away. She burst out onto the street and didn't stop running for 10 blocks. She finally ducked into a dark, empty bus stop, her chest heaving, not from exhaustion, but from the sheer, dizzying thrill of it all. Her breath caught. She was safe. She had saved herself. And she knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and liberating, that she could never go back. Her life as a simple, invisible baker was over. It had ended the moment that man with golden eyes had stepped out of the shadows.
The air in the war room was stale with the scent of fear, old maps, and dying hope. Arik stood before a massive table carved from the heart of an ancient oak, the entire map of the territory spread across it. Red markers, like drops of blood, showed where Rorik's forces had struck. His homes were burning, his people were dying, and it was his fault. "He has the southern pass completely blocked," Kyle reported, his voice grim. "We tried to push through. We lost 12 warriors." "He is bleeding us, Alpha," Elder Ronan said, his voice heavy. "He knows we cannot sustain a long war. He wants us weak. He wants us desperate." Arik stared at the map, but he didn't see the troop movements or the strategic points. He saw a small, warm cabin in the woods. He saw a flash of defiant fire and a pair of human eyes. He smelled cinnamon and vanilla. The memory was a knife in his gut. "He has sent another offer of truce," Maeve said softly. Arik looked up, his golden eyes cold and hard. "There is no truce with a man who sends assassins after a lone woman." "There is if it saves the pack," Ronan countered, his voice rising. "He is a snake, we all know this, but the offer stands. An alliance, a union between the packs. Your hand, for his daughter Lyra's. He will call off his war packs the moment you agree." The air thickened. Every eye in the room was on him. They were his council, his family, his pack, and they were asking him to cut out his own heart to save them. He could feel the mate bond, a dull, constant ache that screamed Mira's name. To agree to this would be the ultimate betrayal of that bond, of his own soul. But then he thought of the families huddled in the stronghold's shelters. He thought of the warriors who had died following his orders. He thought of the kingdom his father had entrusted to him. A king does not have the luxury of a heart. A king is a shield, and a shield is meant to be broken for the sake of what it protects. He closed his eyes for a single agonizing second. He saw Mira's face. "I'm sorry." "Send a messenger to Rorik," Arik said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "Tell him I accept his terms." A collective sigh of relief went through the room. Kyle looked at him, his face a mask of profound sorrow. Rorik's daughter Lyra, who had been waiting in an adjoining chamber, was summoned. She swept into the room, a triumphant, venomous smile on her perfectly painted lips. She was beautiful, he supposed, in a sharp, predatory way. But looking at her, he felt nothing. Less than nothing. A cold, hollow void. "Alpha King Arik," she purred, giving a slight mocking bow. "You have made a wise decision. My father will be pleased." "Your father's pleasure is of no concern to me," Arik said, his voice like chipping ice. "This is for my people. Nothing more." Her smile didn't falter. She saw a king, a prize, an alliance. She didn't see the man who had just set fire to his own soul. As a result, she had no idea how much danger she was truly in. He had made his choice. He had saved his kingdom. But the wolf inside him had gone silent, and in its place was a cold, patient monster that would one day have its revenge.
She spent 2 days in a cheap, anonymous motel on the edge of the city. She didn't sleep. She just sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, staring at the map she had smoothed out on the worn floral bedspread. It was no longer a symbol of rejection. It was a challenge, a dare. She thought of him. She remembered the agony in his eyes when he looked at her, the desperate way he'd held her. It wasn't the look of a man who felt nothing. It was the look of a man who felt everything and was fighting it with every fiber of his being. He wasn't her enemy. He was a piece of her puzzle, the biggest piece. Deep down, she knew the truth. She couldn't go back to the bakery. She couldn't live a normal life. Not anymore. Not knowing what she was, what she could do. not knowing that a world of golden-eyed men and ancient wars existed just beyond the veil. Hiding from it felt like a betrayal of the girl who had found the strength to run, the girl who had saved her own life. She traced a river on the map with her finger, her nail stopping at a symbol that looked like a snarling wolf's head. Silvermoon Stronghold. His home. Her heartbreak had cooled, leaving behind a hard, clear resolve. She wasn't going there for him. Not really. She wasn't chasing a fairy tale. She was chasing the truth. She was going for the girl in the warehouse who didn't know why she could run so fast. For the girl in the alley who didn't know why she was being hunted. She was going for herself. It was the only choice she had left. Come morning, she checked out of the motel. She left the key on the counter, and with a small, worn backpack containing all that was left of her old life, she walked out of the city. She didn't look back. She followed a winding road that turned into a dirt track, which then faded into a barely there path at the edge of a vast, ancient forest. The air here was different. It smelled of damp earth, of pine needles, of secrets as old as the moon. It felt wild. It felt familiar. She stood at the edge of the trees, the map clutched in her hand. This was it. The border between her world and his. The point of no return. As the sky darkened, she took a deep breath, the wild air filling her lungs. And she stepped across the invisible line, leaving the human world behind for good. The forest floor was a tapestry of damp earth and tangled roots, and Mira moved through it like a ghost. The wild, untamed energy she'd felt at the edge of the woods had solidified into a hard, clear purpose. She wasn't running from her past anymore. Instead, she was marching toward her future, one determined step at a time. The air here was different, ancient and alive, and it resonated with the strange new power humming in her blood. Soon after, she crested a ridge, and the trees gave way. And she saw it. The Silvermoon Stronghold. It wasn't a castle of fairy tale turrets and flags. It was a fortress carved from the heart of a mountain, a jagged crown of stone and shadow that seemed to have grown from the earth itself. It was vast, intimidating, and it pulsed with a raw, primal power that made the hair on her arms stand up. A strange mix of awe and trepidation coiled in her stomach. This was his home. This was the world he had tried to protect her from. As she drew closer, she realized a massive gathering was underway in the great courtyard before the mountain's gates. Hundreds of people. No, not people. She realized with a jolt. Their energy felt different, wilder, were crowded together, their faces turned toward a raised stone platform. A low, rhythmic chanting filled the air. Her instincts surged. Something important was happening. She pulled the hood of her worn cloak over her head, her heart beginning a low, anxious thrum. She needed to find him, but she couldn't just walk into the middle of this. She slipped into the edges of the crowd, her small frame easily swallowed by the throng of broad-shouldered men and tall, graceful women. They were all dressed in fine leathers and dark, rich fabrics. She, in her dusty human clothes, had never felt more out of place. She pushed her way forward, a desperate need to see, to understand, pulling her like a string. The chanting grew louder, more intense, and then she saw him, Arik. He stood on the stone platform, and he was every inch the king. He wore no crown, but he didn't need one. Power rolled off him in invisible waves, a palpable force that commanded the absolute attention of the crowd. He was magnificent. He was beautiful, and a fierce, possessive pride bloomed hot in her chest. That was the man who had saved her. The man who had touched her and set her soul on fire. Her breath caught. He wasn't alone. Standing beside him, her hand possessively on his arm, was a woman. She was stunning, with hair as black as a raven's wing and eyes that glittered with a cold, triumphant fire. She wore a gown of deep crimson that looked like spun blood, and she smiled at the crowd as if she owned them all. Mira's blood went cold. An elder, his voice like the grinding of stones, was speaking in a language she didn't understand, but the meaning was universal. The gestures, the positioning, the way the woman looked at Arik. It wasn't a political meeting. In the echo of the elder's voice, the terrible, soul-shattering truth crashed down on her. It was a mating ceremony. His mating ceremony. The world didn't just tilt. It shattered into a million pieces. The air was punched from her lungs. The defiant anger, the brave resolve, the desperate hope that had carried her all this way. It all turned to ash and blew away. The note. "I'm sorry." He hadn't been sorry for leaving her. He'd been sorry because he was choosing someone else. He had a queen. He had a life. And she was just a secret, a dirty little problem he'd had to clean up. Her deepest fear, the ugly, whispering belief that she was worthless, rose up and choked her. She was nothing. She had chased a ghost, a fantasy, only to find he was real, and he belonged to another. The pain was a physical thing, a jagged blade twisting in her gut. She didn't make a sound. She just turned, a single, silent tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek, and she ran. She ran from the ceremony, from the crowd, from the soul-crushing sight of the man she loved binding himself to another for eternity.
He was a statue, a king carved from ice. Arik stood on the ceremonial platform and felt nothing. The elder's words droned on, ancient vows of union and strength that tasted like poison on the air. Lyra's hand on his arm was a viper's touch, her triumphant scent of exotic flowers a cloying, suffocating perfume. He was doing his duty. He was saving his people. And he was dying inside. He looked out over the faces of his pack. He saw their relief, their hope for peace. And because of that, he held himself rigid, burying the wolf, burying the man, burying every last screaming instinct that told him this was a desecration of his soul. He was a shield. This was his purpose. And then he scented her. Cinnamon, vanilla, and the clean, fresh scent of rain-soaked earth. Mira. The shock was a physical blow, a lightning strike to his hollow heart. His head snapped up, his golden eyes scanning the crowd, frantically searching. The mate bond, which had been a dull, throbbing ache for days, roared to life, a supernova of longing and agony in her. He found her. A small, hooded figure at the edge of the crowd. He saw her face, saw the dawning horror in her eyes, saw the single shimmering tear that broke free. He saw her spirit, the beautiful, resilient fire he had come to adore, just go out. Extinguished. He saw her turn. He saw her run. In that moment, the world ceased to exist. The pack, the elders, the war, the duty. It was all meaningless noise. Lyra's grip on his arm was nothing. The elder's words were nothing. The only thing that was real was the sight of his mate, his soul, his entire world breaking apart because of him. He had not just broken her heart. He had murdered her hope. No. The word was a strangled growl, ripped from a place deeper than his lungs. Alpha? Lyra purred, her grip tightening. The final vow. He looked at her. He truly looked at her, and the cold void inside him was suddenly filled with a rage so pure, so absolute, it was a miracle she didn't burst into flames. The tension broke. He ripped his arm from her grasp. He ignored the elder's shocked cry, ignored Lyra's hiss of fury. He ignored the collective gasp of 2,000 wolves. He saw only the path his mate had taken. He launched himself from the platform, a king abdicating his throne in a single desperate leap. He hit the ground and ran, pushing through his own stunned people, his every instinct screaming her name. The sounds of chaos erupted behind him, shouts, confusion, and a single enraged roar from the direction of the visiting Alpha's contingent. The roar of Rorik. He had just publicly humiliated his new ally. He had just declared war. He didn't care. Let the kingdoms burn. He just needed to get to her. He had to explain. He had to fix it.
She ran blindly, crashing through the undergrowth of the ancient forest, tears blurring the world into a green and brown smear. The sounds of the ceremony faded behind her, replaced by the frantic pounding of her own shattered heart. Every step was a new torment. Fool, fool, fool. How could she have been so stupid? How could she have mistaken his pained guilt for love? She didn't know how long she ran. Time had lost all meaning. There was only the pain, and the desperate primal need to put as much distance as possible between herself and that scene of her own humiliation. She stumbled into a small, sun-dappled clearing and finally collapsed, her legs giving out. She sank to the forest floor, curling into a tight ball, and let the sobs come. Harsh, ragged, hopeless sounds that were swallowed by the indifferent silence of the woods. But she wasn't alone. Without warning, they were there. 3 of them. They moved with a silent, predatory grace, stepping out from behind the ancient trees as if they had grown from the earth itself. They wore the dark, severe armor of the stronghold guards. Rorik's guards. Her head snapped up, her body tensing. She scrambled backward, her heart seizing with a fresh wave of terror. The lead guard looked down at her, his face a mask of cold contempt. "The Alpha Rorik is displeased," he said, his voice flat. "You have caused a great dishonor. He wishes to have a word with you." She was trapped. She was exhausted, emotionally and physically broken. She had no impossible burst of speed left in her, no fight. There was nowhere left to run. They hauled her to her feet and dragged her back toward the stronghold, but they didn't take her to the courtyard. They took her to a side entrance, a dark maw in the side of the mountain, and down a torch-lit tunnel into a small cold stone chamber. Rorik was there. He paced back and forth like a caged wolf, his face a thundercloud of pure, murderous rage. The moment she was thrown into the room, he was on her, his hand clamping around her throat, slamming her back against the cold stone wall. "You!" he roared, his face inches from hers, his spittle hitting her cheek. "You worthless stray! Do you have any idea what you have done? You have ruined everything, my alliance, my victory, all of it. For what?" She couldn't breathe. Black spots danced in her vision. As if the forest watched, she saw not a man, but a beast, consumed by its own ambition. He shook her, his grip tightening. "Who are you? Why does he care for you?" He was so close, his furious eyes scanning her face, searching for an answer. And then his gaze fell. It fell to the side of her neck, to a spot just below her ear, where a small, faint birthmark, shaped like a tiny broken crescent moon, had always been. The world stood still. His rage vanished. It was replaced by a sudden, shocking stillness. His grip on her throat loosened. His eyes, which had been burning with fury, were now wide with a dawning, horrified recognition. He let her go, and she slumped against the wall, gasping for air, rubbing her bruised throat. He took a step back, his face pale, his gaze locked on the mark. "It cannot be," he whispered, the sound a strangled thing. He looked at her face, truly seeing it for the first time, not as a problem, but as a ghost from his past. "That mark? I know that mark." He took another step back, his mind clearly reeling, the pieces of a 2-decade-old puzzle clicking into place with an audible snap. The girl who looked like his lost mate. The human girl the Alpha King was obsessed with. The lost daughter he had been told died in a human fire all those years ago. He stared at her, and in his eyes, she saw no love, no fatherly recognition. She saw only the cold, sharp glint of a politician realizing he had just been handed a weapon more powerful than any army. A key, a claim. "Who are you?" he demanded again, but his voice was different now. It was quiet. It was dangerous. Mira pushed herself off the wall, her heart a cold, dead stone in her chest. The man she loved had betrayed her, and the man who was her father. He was looking at her like she was nothing more than a new strategy. In the stillness that followed, she felt the last flicker of hope inside her die. This was her lowest point. Alone. Unloved. A prisoner of her own blood. A pawn for her own father. "I don't know who I am," she whispered, the words a hollow, bitter truth. And in that moment, she truly believed them.
The scent of her terror was a blade in his soul. It was a trail he could follow with his eyes closed, a desperate, frantic scent overlaid with the cold, metallic smell of her father's rage. Arik moved through the mountain's hidden tunnels, not as a king, but as a predator, every instinct honed to a single purpose: find her. His pack, his kingdom, his honor. It had all turned to smoke the moment he saw her break. Now, there was only Mira. He found the stone chamber. 2 of Rorik's personal guards stood outside the heavy oak door. They saw him, their eyes widening in shock, and they reached for their blades. They were dead before their hands found the hilts. Arik didn't slow. He kicked the door, and it splintered from its iron hinges, crashing inward. Rorik was there, his back to the door, his hand still raised from where he had obviously struck Mira. She was crumpled on the floor, a thin line of blood trickling from her lip, her eyes wide with a broken, hollow emptiness that ripped a fresh wound in his heart. "You dare," Rorik snarled, spinning around. "You dare enter my private chambers? She is my blood. You have no claim." "Your blood?" Arik's voice was a low, lethal whisper. "You call this blood?" He gestured to Mira's trembling form. "You call this fatherhood? You are a disease, and I am the cure." He took a step forward, his claws sliding free, the sound a soft, deadly snicked in the tense silence. But then a blur of crimson came from the side. Lyra. She had been lurking in the shadows, her beautiful face twisted into a mask of pure, venomous hatred. In her hand was a dagger, its tip coated with the sickly green shimmer of wolfsbane. To make things worse, her target wasn't him. It was Mira. "If I cannot be his queen," she shrieked, her voice a piercing cry of madness, "then neither can this half-breed whore." She lunged. Her body moved on instinct, but Arik's moved on something faster. On the absolute, undeniable command of the mate bond, he crossed the room in a single, impossible bound, a blur of shadow and fury. He didn't just intercept Lyra. He threw himself in front of Mira, a living shield. The wolfsbane-tipped dagger plunged deep into his shoulder. A fire of pure agony erupted in his veins. The poison was instant, a searing, white-hot torment designed to kill a wolf from the inside out. He roared, a sound of both pain and undiluted rage, and he backhanded Lyra, sending her flying across the room where she crashed against the stone wall and crumpled in a heap. He ignored her. He ignored Rorik, who stood frozen in shock. He stumbled to his knees before Mira, the poisoned dagger still buried in his shoulder. He reached out, his hand trembling from the poison's fire, and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb wiping away the blood from her lip. "Mira," he gasped, his vision starting to blur at the edges. "I'm here."
She watched the scene unfold as if from a great distance. She saw Lyra's attack, saw Arik move faster than lightning to take the blow that was meant for her. She saw the poisoned dagger buried in his shoulder, and she saw the agony that ripped through his powerful frame. And in that moment, the hollow emptiness inside her shattered, and something fierce and hot and protective roared to life. He was dying. For her. "No," she whispered. He was on his knees in front of her, his golden eyes hazy with pain, but they were focused only on her. And she saw it then. The truth. The raw, unfiltered, agonizing truth. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't duty. It was love. A love so profound he would die for her without a second thought. As the truth unraveled, her father, Rorik, finally shook off his shock. "Guards!" he bellowed. "Seize them!" But Arik just smiled, a grim, painful twisting of his lips. "You think your guards are coming?" He coughed, a fleck of blood on his lips. Suddenly the sounds of fighting echoed from the tunnels outside, the clash of steel, the snarls of wolves, the screams of men. Kyle. He had brought Arik's warriors. They were tearing Rorik's stronghold apart from the inside. Arik swayed, his strength finally failing. He collapsed forward, and she caught him, his dead weight a warm, solid presence against her. "Come on," she grunted, her voice finding a strength she didn't know she possessed. She pulled his arm over her shoulders, staggering under his weight. "You are not dying here. You hear me?" She pulled the dagger from his shoulder, ignoring his groan of pain, and threw the cursed thing into the corner. And then she began to drag him, step by agonizing step, out of that stone prison and into the chaos of the tunnels, leaving her father standing alone in the ruins of his ambition. They found Kale in a torchlit passage, his silver blades dripping with blood. He took one look at Arik's pale face, and the black veins of poison spreading from the wound, and his face went grim. "The cabin," Kale said, taking Arik's other side. "It's the only safe place." Together they got him out, disappearing into the chaos of the battle, and then into the silent sanctuary of the forest.
Back in the cabin, the fire blazed. Arik lay on the bed, his body convulsing, his skin clammy and pale. The poison was killing him. Mira worked frantically, guided by Kale's terse instructions, grinding herbs, boiling water, forcing a foul-smelling antidote between Arik's clenched teeth. For hours, she fought for his life. And in the quiet moments, when his fevered thrashing stilled, she finally got her answers. He told her everything, his voice a raw, pained rasp. He told her she was the lost daughter of Rorik, presumed dead. He told her he had known from the first moment he saw her. He told her about the mate bond, the unbreakable, fated connection that had forced him to protect her. And then, he told her why he had left. To claim you would have meant war, he whispered, his golden eyes clouded with regret. To announce that my mate was Rorik's lost heir. He would have used you, a pawn to put his own blood on my throne. I stayed away. I pushed you away to protect you from this. From him. The ceremony. With Lyra. It was a lie. A sacrifice to stop the bloodshed. But I saw you. And I chose you. I will always choose you. As the silence roared, every piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Every cold rejection, every silent departure. It wasn't abandonment. It was a shield. It was a desperate, agonizing sacrifice. He hadn't been leaving her. He had been protecting her. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of a fierce, profound understanding. Rest, she whispered, pressing a cool, damp cloth to his forehead. By morning, the fever had broken. The poison receded, leaving him weak, but alive. He woke to find her sitting in a chair beside the bed, watching him, her eyes clear and filled with a resolve he had never seen before. The world thinks I'm an abomination, she said, her voice quiet but strong. My own father sees me as a weapon, and you almost died for me. He started to speak, to apologize, but she held up a hand. No more apologies, she said. No more hiding. You said you wanted to make me a queen. First, you have to make me a warrior. He looked at her, at the baker girl who was no longer just a baker. He saw the fire in her, the dormant wolf, the nascent queen, and for the first time in a long time he felt a surge of hope. The days that followed transformed the cabin into a training ground. He taught her. He showed her how to feel the power in her blood, not as an accident, but as a weapon. They sparred in the clearing outside, her movements growing more confident, more fluid, more lethal. She was a natural, her instincts sharp, her will unbreakable. The training was more than just fighting. It was a new kind of intimacy. It was the trust of a shared battle plan, the respect of a warrior for his equal, the press of his hand on her back to correct her stance that sent fire through her veins. One evening, as the sun bled through the trees, she finally broke through his guard, her foot sweeping his legs out from under him. He landed on his back with a grunt of surprise, and she was on him in a flash, pinning him, her face inches from his, her chest heaving. He looked up at her, not with the eyes of a teacher, but with the raw, possessive hunger of a mate. You learn fast, he growled, his voice thick. I have a good teacher, she breathed, the scent of him, of pine and power and home, overwhelming her. The tension broke. He tangled his hand in her hair and pulled her down, his mouth crashing against hers. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a culmination of every silent rescue, every ounce of shared pain, every secret finally brought to light. It was a desperate, passionate claiming, a sealing of their bond not with vows but with fire. But as their new world was being forged, the old one was plotting. Kyle arrived 2 nights later, his face grim. A proclamation, from Rorik. He handed Arik a scroll. Arik read it, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. What is it? Mira asked. He looked at her, his golden eyes blazing. He has publicly disowned you. He has declared you an outcast. A creature of no pack, of no bloodline, an abomination raised by humans. Mira felt the words like a physical blow, her own father. He has put a price on your head, Arik continued, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. A bounty, open to any wolf from any pack. He wants you hunted. He wants you erased. Mira stood there, the firelight dancing on her face. This was it. The final rejection. The ultimate declaration that she did not belong anywhere. She thought of the fear she used to live with, the desperate need to be invisible. It felt like a lifetime ago. That girl was gone. She looked at Arik, at the king who had chosen her over his kingdom, at the mate who had almost died for her. She was not an outcast. She was not an abomination. She was his, and he was hers. She stepped forward and took the scroll from his hand, her gaze as hard and sharp as flint. "He wants to hunt me?" she said, her voice a low, steady whisper that held the promise of a coming storm. She crumpled the scroll in her fist. Let him try. She looked up at Arik, a queen claiming her throne. It's time he meets his daughter.
The world had shrunk to the space between heartbeats. Mira walked beside Arik at the head of a small elite force of his warriors, moving through the moon-drenched forest toward the clearing where Rorik's army waited. The air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of pine, nervous sweat, and the metallic tang of unsheathed steel. This wasn't a rescue. This wasn't an escape. This was a reckoning. She wasn't the girl from the bakery anymore. That girl was a ghost, a memory. In her place was a woman who had been hunted, kidnapped, betrayed, and reborn. She could feel the wild, electric hum of her own power, a dormant wolf awake and pacing just beneath her skin, hungry for a fight. They broke through the trees. The clearing was a sea of dark shapes and glinting eyes. Rorik's pack. They were a massive force, outnumbering Arik's warriors 3-1. At their head stood her father, his face a mask of arrogant certainty. And then she saw what he was holding. He had a woman in front of him, a knife to her throat. She was small, with brown hair, dressed in a simple baker's apron. A decoy. A cruel, theatrical prop meant to look like the weak human girl he thought she still was. "Arik!" Rorik's voice boomed across the clearing, a sound of false sincerity. "You have defied our traditions. You have broken a sacred vow for this. This half-breed stray. She is an abomination, a taint on our bloodline. Cast her out, and I will spare your people this war." Her chest ached, not with fear, but with a cold, clear rage. He was still trying to make her small, still trying to make her invisible. Arik stepped forward, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that carried to every corner of the clearing. "You speak of tradition, Rorik. You who abandoned your own daughter, you who uses poison and kidnaps women in the dark. The only abomination here is you." He drew his long, silver blade, its surface gleaming under the moonlight. "She is not a stray. She is the rightful heir of your blood, and she is my mate, my queen. We will not be cast out. We have come to take what is ours." Rorik laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. He shoved the decoy to the ground. "Then your pack will die for the love of a mongrel," he roared, and he charged. The world exploded into a nightmare of claws and steel. The two packs crashed together with the force of a tidal wave. Arik was a whirlwind of death at the center of it, his blade a silver blur, his movements a symphony of controlled, lethal fury. Mira stayed close to him, her body humming, her senses preternaturally sharp. She saw an opening, a wolf lunging at Arik's exposed side. Her wolf pressed forward, and she let it happen. She moved, faster than humanly possible, and slammed her elbow into the wolf's throat, sending him staggering back, choking. She fought with a grace she didn't know she possessed, her body a weapon, her mind a cold, clear point of focus. But Rorik was a true alpha, a beast of pure, brute strength. He carved a path through Arik's warriors, his eyes locked on his rival. He met Arik in the center of the clearing, and the two alphas crashed together. It was a battle of titans, but Rorik was fueled by pure, desperate ambition, and he fought dirty. He used a hidden blade, gashing Arik's leg. Arik roared in pain, stumbling, and Rorik saw his opening. He lunged, his claws extended, aiming for Arik's throat. Time stood still. Mira saw it all. She saw Arik, her king, her mate, about to fall. She saw her father, the man who had despised and used her, about to win. The world was screaming for her to run, to hide, to be the victim. But the girl who ran was gone. A sound tore from her throat, a sound that was not a scream, but a roar, a sound of pure, untamed power. No! As fire bloomed beneath her skin, a wave of silver light exploded from her. It was agony and ecstasy, 1,000 bones breaking and reforming in a single, breathtaking instant. Her human form dissolved, melting away into something older, truer, and infinitely more powerful. She rose, not as a woman, but as a wolf. She was huge, a magnificent creature of silver fur and muscle, her eyes the same impossible liquid gold as the man she loved.
The entire battlefield froze. Every wolf from both packs stopped fighting, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and absolute reverence. They were staring at her, at the impossible truth of her. Rorik, his claws inches from Arik's throat, staggered back, his face a mask of utter disbelief. It cannot be. The silver wolf, Mira, did not hesitate. With a single glance at Arik's bleeding form, she launched herself at her father. She was not just a wolf, she was an alpha, and she was defending her mate. Arik watched, a fierce, bloody smile spreading across his lips despite the pain. He pushed himself to his feet, his own wolf surging to the surface, and he joined her. They fought as one. As if their souls were linked, he would feint left, and she would attack right. She would drive Rorik back, and he would press the advantage. They were a seamless, lethal dance of silver and shadow, two halves of a single perfect warrior. Rorik was powerful, but he was alone. He was fighting a bond forged in fire and prophecy. He fell, not to a single blade, but to the combined overwhelming force of their love. The silver wolf pinned him, her fangs at his throat, and the dark-furred wolf stood over them, a king protecting his queen. The war was over. In the quiet that followed, a new sound filled the clearing. It was the sound of the wind through the pines. Then, another. One by one, the wolves of Rorik's pack, their leader defeated, their certainty shattered, lowered their heads. They bowed. Then Arik's own warriors, seeing the impossible made real, did the same. They weren't just bowing to their king. They were bowing to their queen. Mira felt the fight drain out of her, replaced by a profound, trembling sense of rightness. She shifted back, the silver light receding, leaving her standing naked and powerful in the center of the silent, kneeling army. Arik was at her side in an instant, shrugging off his own leather tunic and wrapping it around her. He looked at the crowd, at the two packs now united in their awe, and he spoke, his voice ringing with an authority that left no room for doubt. "There is no Rorik's pack or my pack," he declared. "There is only our pack, and this is your queen." He turned to her, his golden eyes filled with a love so fierce, so absolute. It was the most powerful thing she had ever witnessed. In the chaos, she saw Lyra, her face a mask of defeated hatred, slip away into the shadows of the forest, a ghost returning to the night. She was a problem for another day, or for no day at all.
Later that night, the stronghold was quiet. A new kind of quiet. Not the tense, watchful silence of a kingdom at war, but the deep, peaceful hum of a world set right. Mira stood on the great stone balcony that overlooked the valley, the cool night air a balm on her skin. She was wearing a simple, soft gown of deep blue, and Arik's tunic was folded neatly nearby. She felt a presence behind her and turned. Arik stood in the doorway, his shoulder bandaged, his leg patched, but his eyes were clear and bright. He walked to her, stopping just before her. "I never wanted this for you," he said, his voice a low, soft rumble. "The fighting, the politics, the crown. I only ever wanted you to be safe." "You wanted me to be a baker," she said, a small, soft smile touching her lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "I wanted you to be happy," he corrected gently. She looked out at the vast, moonlit kingdom spread below them, her kingdom. "I was never going to be happy hiding, Arik. I spent my whole life feeling like a ghost. I didn't start living until you." He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. The space between them hummed, not with tension, but with a deep, settled peace. "From the first night I saw you in that bakery, my soul knew yours. Every time I walked away, it was like ripping a part of myself out. I'm done walking away, Mira. He went down on one knee, not as a king to a subject, but as a man to his equal, his soul. "Rule with me," he said, his golden eyes blazing with all the love he had held back for so long. "Be my partner, my queen, my wife." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She thought of her long, lonely journey, of every painful step that had led her to this exact moment. She reached down, taking his hand and pulling him back to his feet. She pressed her forehead against his. "I was never running from you," she whispered, the words a final, perfect truth. "I was always running toward you." He let out a shaky breath, and then his mouth found hers. The kiss was not the desperate, frantic claiming of the cabin. It was a promise. It was a vow. It was a home. And as if on cue, from the valley below, a single lone howl rose up into the night. It was answered by another and then another until the air was filled with the sound of two packs, now one, howling their approval to the moon. A symphony of loyalty, a song of a new beginning. For their king, and for the baker who had become their alpha queen.